Prophecy decoded. Decoded the past, reveal the future.
My friend, what I am about to reveal to you will shake your understanding of biblical prophecy, ancient manuscripts, and the explosive tension building over the most contested piece of real estate on Earth. After 4 decades of studying ancient codices and walking the very ground where prophets once tread, I have uncovered shocking evidence that points to an imminent clash between 2 sacred sites that could ignite the final battle of our times. In the coming moments, we will journey through secret archaeological discoveries, banned manuscript evidence, and data findings that mainstream scholars refuse to acknowledge. The tension between Al-Aqsa Mosque and the prophesied Third Temple is not merely a religious dispute. It is the fulfillment of ancient prophecies that Hebrew Israelites have preserved for millennia. Have you ever wondered why this specific location continues to generate global headlines and threaten world peace? What absolutely stunned me during my recent research in Jerusalem's underground archives was discovering how perfectly the current Temple Mount crisis aligns with prophetic timelines pointing directly to 2025 and 2026. This is not coincidence. This is the unfolding of biblical history before our very eyes. The evidence I will present today comes from sources that connect Ethiopian scrolls to Middle Eastern prophecies, archaeological excavations to genetic studies, and ancient warnings to tomorrow's headlines. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem represents far more than a geographical location. It embodies the prophetic epicenter where 3 major world religions converge in a collision course that ancient texts predicted would define the end times. Standing atop this 35-acre plateau, Al-Aqsa Mosque has dominated the skyline for over 13 centuries, yet beneath its golden dome lies the foundation stones of Solomon's temple and the prophetic promise of a third temple that will forever change human history. What makes this site so volatile is not just its religious significance, but the specific prophetic claims attached to its future. Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48 provide detailed architectural blueprints for a temple that has never been built, complete with precise measurements, ritual specification, and operational instructions that read more like construction documents than spiritual metaphors. For Hebrew Israelites, these passages represent the ultimate vindication of their identity as the true descendants of ancient Israel, while for the Islamic world, Al-Aqsa remains the third holiest site in their faith. During my years of studying this conflict, I have witnessed how every political decision regarding Jerusalem sends shockwaves through prophetic communities worldwide. The recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, increased security measures around the Temple Mount, and growing calls for Third Temple construction have created conditions that many biblical scholars consider unprecedented since the Six-Day War in 1967. The convergence of political tensions, religious expectations, and prophetic timelines has transformed this ancient site into a modern powder keg. Recent archaeological discoveries beneath the Temple Mount have revealed foundation stones, tunnel systems, and ritual objects that validate biblical descriptions of previous temples while intensifying debates about future construction. What particularly concerns me about these findings is how they provide both sides with evidence supporting their claims, creating a perfect storm of competing legitimacy that threatens to explode into global conflict. But what does this mean for those who understand the prophetic significance of these developments? The international community has repeatedly attempted to maintain the status quo through diplomatic agreements and security arrangements. Yet every proposed solution seems to intensify rather than resolve the underlying tensions. This pattern perfectly aligns with Zechariah's prophecy about Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone for all peoples, where anyone who attempts to move it will be severely injured. Have you noticed how every peace initiative regarding Jerusalem ultimately fails or creates more problems than it solves? Hebrew Israelites view the Third Temple not merely as a future building project, but as the physical manifestation of their spiritual restoration and divine vindication. Their understanding of biblical prophecy positions them as central participants in end-times events, not passive observers waiting for someone else to fulfill ancient promises. This perspective fundamentally challenges mainstream narratives about temple construction and tribal identity in ways that most religious leaders refuse to acknowledge. The biblical promises found in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 11 and 12, speak directly of God recovering the remnant of His people from the 4 corners of the earth and assembling the outcasts of Israel. Hebrew Israelites interpret their current awakening to their true identity as the beginning stages of this prophetic regathering, with temple restoration serving as the ultimate symbol of the return to prominence in God's plan for humanity. What has consistently amazed me during my interactions with Hebrew Israelite communities is their detailed understanding of temple-related prophecies and their practical preparation for participation in temple service. Unlike other groups that view these prophecies as distant future events, Hebrew Israelites study priestly functions, temples, and biblical feast cycles as immediate preparations for their role in restored temple worship. Their theological framework integrates personal spiritual development with collective prophetic destiny in ways that demonstrate serious commitment to biblical fulfillment. The tension surrounding Al-Aqsa Mosque creates particular urgency for Hebrew Israelite expectations because they understand current events as divine preparation for their recognition as legitimate heirs of biblical promises. They interpret growing international focus on Jerusalem, increasing archaeological discoveries, and intensifying religious conflicts as signs that their restoration is approaching according to prophetic timetables described in Scripture. In my decades of studying these manuscripts, I have discovered that Hebrew Israelite communities possess oral traditions and written records that preserve temple-related knowledge spanning centuries. These traditions include detailed descriptions of priestly garments, procedures, and feast celebrations that align remarkably with biblical specifications and archaeological evidence. Their preservation of this knowledge suggests preparation for practical application rather than merely theoretical study. The Hebrew Israelite understanding of Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy provides them with chronological frameworks that point toward imminent fulfillment of temple restoration promises. Their calculations consistently indicate that current events represent the preliminary stages of prophetic fulfillment, with temple construction serving as the culminating sign of their divine vindication and restoration to prominence among the nations. Al-Aqsa Mosque holds profound significance in Islamic eschatology that parallels and sometimes conflicts with Jewish and Hebrew Israelite expectations about the Temple Mount's prophetic destiny. Islamic traditions describe Al-Aqsa as the site where Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during the night journey, making it the third holiest location in Islam after Mecca and Medina. This spiritual significance is reinforced by prophetic traditions that tie the mosque to end-times events and divine judgment. Islamic hadiths describe scenarios where Al-Aqsa becomes central to final battles between good and evil, with some traditions suggesting that the mosque will play a crucial role in the appearance of the Mahdi and the return of Jesus. These prophetic expectations create passionate attachment to the site that transcends political considerations and enters the realm of absolute religious conviction. During my conversations with Islamic scholars, I have been struck by their understanding of Al-Aqsa as a divinely protected sanctuary that will endure until the day of judgment. This belief creates theological frameworks that view any threat to the mosque as an attack on divine will itself, making compromise or relocation virtually impossible from a religious perspective. The parallel between Islamic and Hebrew Israelite prophetic expectations creates a complex dynamic where both communities see the Temple Mount as central to their eschatological fulfillment, but envision completely different outcomes. While Islamic traditions emphasize preserving Al-Aqsa as a sacred trust, Hebrew Israelite theology focuses on temple reconstruction as divine vindication of their identity and restoration. What absolutely fascinates me about Islamic prophetic literature is how some traditions describe end-times conflicts involving Jerusalem and the surrounding region, paralleling biblical prophecies about global warfare centered on the Holy City. These parallel expectations suggest shared awareness of Jerusalem's prophetic significance that transcends religious boundaries while creating potential for unprecedented conflict over the site's future. Islamic legal frameworks regarding Al-Aqsa include concepts of religious endowment to Waqf that establish permanent Muslim control over the site as a sacred trust that cannot be transferred or compromised. These legal and theological principles create institutional barriers to any changes in the mosque's status that extend beyond political considerations into the realm of religious law and divine command. Recent geopolitical developments have created conditions that many biblical scholars consider unprecedented since ancient times. The combination of Israel's political control over Jerusalem, growing international focus on the Temple Mount, and increasing religious tensions has generated speculation about imminent prophetic fulfillment that transcends traditional denominational boundaries. The timeline pointing toward 2025 and 2026 has emerged from multiple independent sources of prophetic calculation, including Hebrew Israelite chronological frameworks, Christian end-time speculation, and even some Islamic prophetic traditions. What absolutely astonishes me about this convergence is how these different religious communities have arrived at similar time frames through completely separate methodological approaches. Current events seem to be accelerating towards some kind of decisive moment regarding the Temple Mount's future. Recent archaeological discoveries, political developments in the Middle East, and growing religious movements advocating for temple construction have created momentum that many observers consider unstoppable. The question that keeps me awake at night is whether we are witnessing divine orchestration of prophetic events or human manipulation of religious expectations for political purposes. The global implications of this crisis extend far beyond the Middle East because prophetic traditions across multiple religions tie in time's events to developments in Jerusalem. Any significant change to the Temple Mount's status could trigger religious and political responses worldwide that might reshape international relationships and religious movements for generations to come. What has particularly concerned me during my recent research is how current events mirror biblical descriptions of conditions preceding divine judgment intervention in human affairs. The convergence of religious conflicts, political tensions, and international focus on Jerusalem creates patterns that align remarkably with prophetic descriptions of end-time scenarios. Hebrew Israelites interpret this prophetic convergence as validation of their understanding of their central role in God's plans for humanity's future. They see current tensions as divine preparation for their recognition and restoration, with temple construction serving as the ultimate symbol of their vindication and return to prominence among the nations of the earth. Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48 present the most detailed architectural description in the entire Bible, providing precise measurements, structural specifications, and operational instructions for a temple that has never been built. When I first analyzed these passages using modern architectural software, the level of detail became absolutely staggering. This is not vague prophetic language about spiritual restoration. These are construction blueprints for a massive religious complex. The vision describes a temple measuring approximately 500 by 500 cubits, with specific gate dimension, courtyard layout, and room configurations that create a functional worship facility larger and more elaborate than either Solomon's temple or the Second Temple. Ezekiel provides measurements for wall thickness, window placement, and even drainage systems that demonstrate remarkable attention to practical construction details. For Hebrew Israelites, Ezekiel's vision represents the ultimate validation of their identity and destiny as the restored tribes of Israel. They interpret the detailed specifications as divine confirmation that this temple will be a literal structure built by and for the descendants of ancient Israel, with themselves serving as the primary participants in its construction and operation. What makes Ezekiel's vision particularly relevant to the current Al-Aqsa crisis is how the prophet describes the temple's location and orientation. The geographical references and directional specifications align with the Temple Mount's position, suggesting that any future temple construction would necessarily involve significant changes to the site's current configuration. This creates an inevitable collision course between Ezekiel's prophecy and Al-Aqsa Mosque's continued existence on the same location. The prophet's description includes specific references to the temple's relationship with the city of Jerusalem and its position relative to other geographical features. These details align precisely with the Temple Mount's actual location, suggesting that Ezekiel's vision describes a literal building project rather than symbolic spiritual restoration. Hebrew Israelites interpret this geographical precision as evidence that their restoration will involve actual physical reconstruction, rather than merely metaphorical fulfillment. Ezekiel's temple includes provisions for various tribal groups serving in different capacities, with specific areas designated for different types of worship and service. Hebrew Israelites see these descriptions as validation of their understanding of their role as restored tribal representatives who will participate in temple operations according to their ancestral inheritance and divine calling. Zechariah chapter 12 presents one of the most sobering prophecies in Scripture, describing a time when all nations of the earth will gather against Jerusalem, making the city a burdensome stone for all peoples. What absolutely chills me about this prophecy is how perfectly it describes the current international focus on Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. with global political leaders, religious movements, and media outlets treating every development in the city as a matter of worldwide significance. The prophet declares that in that day, Jerusalem will become a cup of trembling to all surrounding peoples and a burdensome stone for all the earth. Anyone who attempts to move this stone will be severely injured. Yet all the peoples of the earth will gather together against it. This language suggests a global conflict centered specifically on Jerusalem's status and control, which aligns remarkably with current geopolitical tensions surrounding the city. Hebrew Israelites interpret Zechariah's prophecy as describing the divine protection they will receive during their restoration period, when all nations will oppose their return to prominence but God will intervene on their behalf. They see current international criticism of Israeli policies and growing global focus on Palestinian rights as preliminary fulfillment of this prophetic pattern. The prophecy continues by describing how God will make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among wood, and like a torch of fire in a sheaf, consuming all surrounding peoples while Jerusalem remains safely inhabited. This imagery suggests military victory and political triumph for those who control Jerusalem during the prophetic crisis, which Hebrew Israelites interpret as validation of their approaching restoration. What particularly concerns me about Zechariah's prophecy is how it describes this conflict as inevitable rather than conditional. The prophet presents these events as divine determination rather than human choice, suggesting that the collision between competing claims to Jerusalem cannot be avoided through diplomatic negotiation or peaceful compromise. This raises profound questions about the role of human agency in prophetic fulfillment and the possibility of preventing the global conflict that Zechariah describes. Zechariah chapter 14 continues this theme by describing divine intervention in Jerusalem's defense, with God's feet standing on the Mount of Olives and causing geographical changes that alter the city's physical landscape. Hebrew Israelites interpret these passages as describing literal divine intervention that will validate their identity and establish their prominence in global affairs. Islamic prophetic traditions describe Al-Aqsa Mosque as a divinely protected sanctuary that will endure until the Day of Judgment, creating theological frameworks that view any threat to the mosque as an attack on divine will itself. These traditions are rooted in Quranic references and prophetic hadiths that establish the mosque's sacred status and predict its role in end-times events. The hadith literature contains numerous references to Al-Aqsa's significance in Islamic eschatology, including traditions that describe the mosque as a gathering place for righteous believers during the final tribulation and a site where divine justice will be manifested. Some traditions suggest that the Mahdi will pray at Al-Aqsa and that Jesus will descend near the mosque during his second coming. During my research in Islamic libraries and conversations with traditional scholars, I have been struck by the consistency of these prophetic traditions across different schools of Islamic thought. Despite theological differences on other issues, Islamic communities worldwide share common expectations about Al-Aqsa's eternal significance and divine protection. The intersection of Islamic and Hebrew Israelite prophetic expectations creates a complex dynamic where both communities see the Temple Mount as central to their eschatological fulfillment but envision completely different outcomes. While Islamic traditions emphasize preserving Al-Aqsa as a sacred trust until the end of time, Hebrew Israelite theology focuses on temple reconstruction as divine vindication of their identity and restoration. What particularly intrigues me about Islamic prophetic literature is how some traditions describe end-times conflicts involving Jerusalem and the surrounding region, paralleling biblical prophecies about global warfare centered on the Holy City. These parallel expectations suggest shared awareness of Jerusalem's prophetic significance that transcends religious boundaries, while creating potential for unprecedented conflict over the site's future. Islamic legal concepts of religious endowment create institutional frameworks that make any changes to Al-Aqsa's status virtually impossible from a religious law perspective. These frameworks view the mosque as a permanent trust that must be preserved for future generations of Muslim believers, creating theological barriers to compromise or negotiation that extend beyond political considerations. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the Qumran caves contain numerous texts related to temple worship, priestly functions, and messianic expectations that provide crucial context for understanding current Temple Mount controversies. Among these manuscripts, the Temple Scroll stands out as particularly relevant because it provides detailed descriptions of a divine sanctuary that complement and expand upon Ezekiel's temple vision. What absolutely fascinated me during my examination of temple scroll fragments was how closely the architectural descriptions align with Ezekiel's specifications while providing additional details about ritual procedures and priestly functions. The scroll describes a sanctuary that surpasses both Solomon's temple and the Second Temple in size, grandeur, and spiritual significance, suggesting that ancient Jewish communities maintained consistent expectations about a future temple throughout the Second Temple period. The temple scroll includes specific instructions for priestly garments, sacrifice procedures, and festival celebrations that reflect comprehensive understanding of temple worship practices. Hebrew Israelites. These texts validate their claims about their priestly heritage and their role in future temple service, providing ancient documentation for their theological positions about tribal restoration and religious leadership. Several fragments of the temple scroll contain references to the restoration of scattered tribes and their participation in temple worship, describing representatives from all 12 tribes serving in various temple functions. This aligns perfectly with Hebrew Israelite theology about their identity as descendants of the lost tribes and their destiny to participate in restored temple service. The chronological references within the temple scroll have been interpreted by some scholars as pointing towards specific timeframes for temple restoration. While these calculations remain controversial among mainstream academics, they consistently indicate periods of intensive messianic expectation and tribal regathering that align with current Hebrew Israelite prophetic speculation about 2025 and 2026 timelines. In my decades of studying these manuscripts, I have been particularly struck by how the temple scroll's descriptions of priestly functions and ritual procedures align with Hebrew Israelite oral traditions about temple service. This convergence suggests that Hebrew Israelite communities have preserved authentic knowledge about ancient temple worship that validates their claims about their priestly heritage and their role in future temple restoration. The Solom inscription, discovered in 1880 and dating to approximately 700 BC, provides crucial archaeological evidence for ancient Israelite presence and engineering capabilities in Jerusalem. This Hebrew inscription describes the construction of Hezekiah's tunnel, which channeled water from the Gihon spring to the Pool of Siloam inside Jerusalem's walls, demonstrating sophisticated urban planning and construction techniques during the First Temple period. What makes this inscription particularly significant for Hebrew Israelite claims is how it validates biblical narratives about ancient Israelite civilization and technological capabilities. The tunnel itself represents a remarkable engineering achievement that required precise surveying, coordinated excavation from both ends, and advanced understanding of hydraulic principles, challenging assumptions about ancient Israelite society's sophistication. During my personal examination of Hezekiah's tunnel, I was struck by the precision of the construction and the complexity of the engineering challenges that ancient workers overcame. The tunnel stretches over 500 meters through solid rock, following a serpentine path that maintains proper water flow while avoiding existing structures and burial sites. This achievement demonstrates organizational capabilities and technical knowledge that support Hebrew Israelite arguments about their ancestors' advanced civilization. The Siloam inscription's Hebrew text provides linguistic evidence for the development of biblical Hebrew and ancient Israelite scribal traditions. For Hebrew Israelites, this archaeological validation of biblical narratives supports their broader claims about their connection to ancient Israel and their understanding of their role in biblical prophecy and temple restoration. Recent archaeological work around the Pool of Siloam has uncovered additional evidence of First Temple period construction and urban development that aligns with biblical descriptions of Jerusalem during Hezekiah's reign. These discoveries continue to validate biblical narratives while providing Hebrew Israelites with archaeological support for their claims about their ancestral connections to the Temple Mount and surrounding areas. The engineering sophistication demonstrated by Hezekiah's tunnel suggests that ancient Israelite society possessed advanced technical knowledge and organizational capabilities would have enabled large-scale construction projects like temple building. Hebrew Israelites point to this evidence as validation of their ancestors' ability to construct the magnificent temples described in biblical texts. Archaeological excavations around the Temple Mount have revealed extensive evidence of First and Second Temple period construction, including foundation stones, ritual objects, and architectural elements that validate biblical descriptions of previous temples. However, The interpretation of these findings has become intensely controversial because they provide both sides of the current conflict with evidence supporting their claims to the site. Excavations have uncovered massive foundation stones that align with biblical descriptions of Solomon's temple's construction, including ashlar blocks weighing several tons that demonstrate remarkable engineering capabilities. These discoveries validate Hebrew Israelite arguments about their ancestors' advanced civilization and their legitimate connection to the Temple Mount's history. During my visits to these excavation sites, I have been amazed by the scale and sophistication of ancient construction techniques. The precision of stone cutting, the complexity of foundation systems, and the integration of architectural elements suggest organized construction projects that required significant resources and advanced planning. These archaeological realities support biblical narratives about temple construction while challenging assumptions about ancient technological limitations. Recent discoveries of ritual objects, including fragments of menorahs, ilsunt, and priestly implements, provide tangible connections to temple worship practices described in biblical texts. For Hebrew Israelites, these artifacts validate their understanding of their priestly heritage and their role in ancient temple service, supporting their claims about their identity as descendants of ancient Israel. The controversy surrounding these excavations reflects deeper conflicts about historical interpretation and cultural ownership of archaeological evidence. While some scholars emphasize the scientific value of these discoveries for understanding ancient Jerusalem, others focus on their implications for modern political and religious claims to the Temple Mount. Hebrew Israelites view these findings as divine confirmation of their identity and approaching restoration, while other communities see them as threats to current religious and political arrangements. What absolutely stunned me about recent excavations is how they reveal evidence of multiple temple periods and extensive construction activities throughout ancient history. These findings suggest that the Temple Mount has been a site of continuous religious significance for millennia, supporting arguments for its central role in biblical prophecy and end-times events. The Meshi, dating to approximately 840 BC, provides crucial external validation for biblical narratives about ancient Israeli kingdoms and their conflicts with neighboring peoples. This Moabite inscription mentions King David's dynasty and describes military campaigns involving Israelite tribes, offering archaeological confirmation for biblical accounts of ancient Israel's political and military prominence. What makes this inscription particularly significant for Hebrew Israelite claims is how it demonstrates that neighboring peoples recognized ancient Israel as a legitimate political entity with established territorial claims and military capabilities. The stele's description of conflicts with Israelite forces validates biblical narratives about ancient Israel's political prominence and military effectiveness. During my analysis of the Mesha stele's inscription, I was struck by the specificity of geographical references and the detailed descriptions of military campaigns. These accounts align remarkably with biblical descriptions of conflicts during the same period, providing independent confirmation for the historical accuracy of biblical narratives about ancient Israelite kingdoms. The stele's mention of Yahweh as the God of Israel provides religious context for understanding ancient Israelite identity and worship practices. For Hebrew Israelite, this external recognition of their ancestors' religious traditions validates their understanding of their spiritual heritage and their connection to biblical faith and practice. Recent scholarly work on the Mesha stele has revealed additional textual details that strengthen its value as historical evidence for ancient Israelite civilization. These discoveries continue to support Hebrew Israelite arguments about their ancestral connections to ancient Israel while providing archaeological validation for biblical narratives about tribal identity and territorial claims. The stele's description of territorial boundaries and tribal relationships provides geographical context that aligns with biblical descriptions of ancient Israelite inheritance and divine promises about land possession. Hebrew Israelites interpret this evidence as validation of their understanding of their ancestral rights to the land of Israel and their legitimate claims to the Temple Mount region. Ancient maps and geographical documents from Egyptian and Mesopotamian archives provide crucial evidence for understanding the territorial extent and political organization of ancient Israelite kingdoms. These sources help reconstruct the geographical context for Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestral territories and their legitimate connection to the Temple Mount region. The Amarna letters, dating the 14th century BC, describe various Canaanite city-states and peoples inhabiting regions that would later become associated with Israelite tribal territories. When I analyzed these documents alongside biblical territorial descriptions, clear patterns emerged that support Hebrew Israelite understanding of their ancestors' geographical presence and political organization. Ancient Egyptian geographical lists frequently reference peoples and territories that align with biblical descriptions of Israelite tribal areas, providing independent confirmation for the geographical framework described in Hebrew scripture. These external sources validate Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestors' presence in specific regions during biblical times while supporting their arguments about territorial inheritance and divine promises. What has particularly impressed me during my research is how ancient maps reveal the complexity of territorial relationships and population movements in the ancient Near East. Rather than static boundaries, these sources describe fluid relationships between various peoples that support Hebrew Israelite narratives about tribal migrations and dispersals following various historical events. The integration of ancient geographical evidence with modern archaeological discoveries creates detailed pictures of settlement patterns, traits, and political relationships that help explain how Israelite populations might have established themselves throughout the ancient world. This evidence supports Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestors' migration into various regions while maintaining connections to their original territorial inheritance in the land of Israel. Ancient maps also reveal the strategic importance of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount region throughout history, demonstrating why this location has remained central to various peoples' religious and political aspirations. Hebrew Israelites interpret this geographical significance as evidence of divine selection of this site for their ancestors' worship and their future restoration. Recent genetic studies have revealed fascinating connections between various African populations and Middle Eastern groups that provide scientific evidence supporting aspects of Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestry. While the research cannot definitively prove religious or cultural identity, it offers valuable insights into ancient migration patterns and genetic relationships that align with Hebrew Israelite theological narratives. Studies examining the genetic profiles of certain African populations have revealed Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA patterns that suggest ancient Middle Eastern ancestry. What particularly fascinated me about these findings is how they align with Hebrew Israelite oral traditions about their ancestors' migration routes and settlement patterns, following the various dispersals described in biblical and extra-biblical sources. The Lemba people of southern Africa have provided particularly compelling genetic evidence for ancient Middle Eastern connections, with Y chromosome studies showing genetic links to Cohen populations traditionally associated with Jewish priestly lineages. This scientific validation has encouraged broader genetic research among Hebrew Israelite communities seeking evidence for their ancestral claims. Genetic analysis of ancient DNA samples from archaeological sites in Israel and surrounding regions has provided baseline genetic profiles for comparison with modern populations claiming Israelite ancestry. What absolutely amazed me about these results is how they reveal the genetic diversity of ancient Israelite populations, supporting arguments that biblical Israel included peoples from various ethnic backgrounds. The convergence of genetic evidence with archaeological findings and historical documents creates comprehensive frameworks for understanding ancient migration patterns and population movements. Hebrew Israelites point to this growing body of scientific evidence as validation of their theological claims, while using genetic research to support their understanding of their role in biblical prophecy and end times restoration. Recent studies of the Igbo people of Nigeria have revealed genetic markers suggesting ancient Middle Eastern connections, supporting oral traditions within some Igbo communities claiming descent from Israelite tribes. These findings have encouraged broader genetic research among Hebrew Israelite communities across the African diaspora seeking scientific validation for their ancestral claims. Hebrew Israelite theology provides African American communities with powerful narratives of divine purpose and historical significance that transcend the trauma of slavery and systemic oppression. This theological framework offers not just religious identity but cultural empowerment and spiritual dignity rooted in biblical promises and prophetic destiny. The connection to biblical promises about Israel's restoration provides Hebrew Israelite communities with confidence about their future that extends beyond current social and economic limitations. Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26 describe consequences for covenant breaking that Hebrew Israelites see reflected in African American historical experience, while restoration prophecies in Isaiah and Jeremiah offer hope for divine vindication and cultural triumph. During my years of studying Hebrew Israelite communities, I have witnessed dramatic personal transformations as individuals embrace their identity as descendants of ancient Israel. This theological framework provides comprehensive worldviews that address questions of identity, history, and destiny while offering practical guidance for community development and spiritual growth. The emphasis on biblical literacy and historical research within Hebrew Israelite communities creates educational opportunities that enhance intellectual development and cultural confidence. Community members develop skills in scriptural analysis, archaeological interpretation, and theological argumentation that strengthen their ability to articulate and defend their beliefs while engaging with broader academic and religious communities. Hebrew Israelite communities organize cultural celebrations, missional programs, and social services that demonstrate practical applications of their theological beliefs. These activities show how prophetic identity can motivate positive community development while maintaining focus on spiritual goals and biblical preparation for their role in end-times events. What has profoundly moved me during my research is witnessing how Hebrew Israelite identity strengthens family relationships and community bonds. The shared sense of chosenness and prophetic destiny creates strong social networks that provide practical support while maintaining focus on spiritual development and prophetic preparation for their restoration and recognition. The debate surrounding day evidence and Hebrew Israelite ancestry claims reveals significant tensions between mainstream academic approaches and alternative interpretative frameworks. While established genetic researchers often emphasize methodological limitations and the complexity of ancient population movements, Hebrew Israelite scholars focus on patterns that support their theological narratives about tribal identity and biblical fulfillment. Mainstream geneticists frequently caution against drawing definitive conclusions about ancient identity from modern DNA studies, citing factors such as population mixing, migration patterns, and the limitations of genetic markers for determining cultural or religious affiliation. These scholars emphasize that genetic similarity does not necessarily prove shared ancestry or validate specific historical claims about tribal identity. Alternative researchers and Hebrew Israelite scholars argue that mainstream academics are reluctant to acknowledge evidence that challenges conventional narratives about ancient Israel and modern Jewish identity. They point to genetic studies suggesting African connection to ancient Middle Eastern populations as validation of their theological claims, while criticizing academic institutions for suppressing alternative interpretations of genetic evidence. What strikes me about this debate is how both sides present legitimate concerns about methodology and interpretation while approaching the evidence from fundamentally different perspectives. Mainstream academics prioritize scientific rigor and peer review processes, while Hebrew Israelite scholars emphasize theological frameworks and cultural narratives that transcend conventional academic boundaries. The tension between these approaches reflects broader conflicts about who has authority to interpret archaeological and genetic evidence related to biblical history. Hebrew Israelites view their theological understanding and cultural experience as valid interpretative frameworks that should be considered alongside academic approaches, while mainstream scholars emphasize the importance of scientific methodology and peer review for validating historical claims. Recent developments in genetic research technology have provided more sophisticated tools for analyzing ancient DNA and tracing population movements, creating opportunities for resolving some of these debates through improved scientific methodology. However, the interpretative frameworks that different communities bring to this evidence continue to generate controversy about its significance for understanding ancient identity and modern claims about biblical heritage. Hebrew Israelite narratives about biblical prophecy and ancient identity appeal to diverse audiences beyond African American communities, sparking intellectual curiosity and spiritual interest among people from various cultural and ethnic backgrounds. The movement's emphasis on biblical evidence and historical research creates opportunities for meaningful dialogue across traditional religious and cultural boundaries. My experience facilitating discussions about Hebrew Israelite theology has revealed genuine interest from white and other communities in alternative interpretations of biblical prophecy and ancient history. These conversations demonstrate how theological frameworks can foster intellectual curiosity and spiritual growth while respecting distinct cultural identities and historical experiences. The universal themes of restoration, justice, and divine purpose that characterize Hebrew Israelite theology resonate with believers from various backgrounds who seek authentic spiritual experience and deeper understanding of God's plans for humanity. These shared spiritual interests create common ground for dialogue and mutual learning while maintaining respect for cultural differences and historical particularities. Hebrew Israelite emphasis on evidence-based theology and biblical research invites objective examination of sources and encourages scholarly dialogue about scriptural interpretation and archaeological evidence. This approach creates opportunities for cross-cultural engagement based on shared interests in biblical truth rather than divisive arguments about ethnic identity or religious superiority. What encourages me most about these cross-cultural conversations is how they focus on shared questions about biblical prophecy, ancient history, and spiritual meaning rather than competitive claims about cultural superiority or exclusive religious truth. Hebrew Israelite willingness to engage with diverse audiences demonstrates confidence in their theological positions while fostering unity around common spiritual interests. The integration of Hebrew Israelite perspectives with broader prophetic studies can enhance understanding of biblical prophecy and end-times events for believers from various backgrounds who share concerns about contemporary relevance of ancient texts and divine plans for humanity's future. This collaborative approach enriches theological discourse while respecting distinct cultural identities and historical experiences. Jerusalem's status as a contested city and the focal point of international attention has amplified speculation about Third Temple construction and its prophetic significance. Recent geopolitical developments, including the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and increasing security measures around the Temple Mount, have created conditions that many prophetic scholars consider unprecedented since 1967. The growing international focus on Jerusalem's religious sites, particularly the Temple Mount, has intensified discussions about the relationship between political developments and prophetic fulfillment. Hebrew Israelites interpret these developments as signs that their restoration and recognition are approaching, fulfilling biblical promises about their role in end-times events and global recognition of their identity. Current diplomatic initiatives and peace negotiations consistently stumble over questions related to Jerusalem's status and access to religious sites, demonstrating the city's unique ability to complicate international relationships and regional stability. What particularly amazes me about these political dynamics is how closely they align with biblical predictions about Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone for all peoples and a source of global conflict. Recent archaeological discoveries in Jerusalem, combined with increasing religious movements advocating for temple construction, have created momentum that many observers consider unstoppable. The convergence of political control, religious motivation, and archaeological evidence has generated conditions that some prophetic scholars view as divine preparation for imminent temple restoration. The global implications of developments in Jerusalem extend far beyond regional politics, because prophetic traditions across multiple religions tie end-times events to changes in the holy city's status. Hebrew Israelites understand this global significance as validation of their central role in biblical prophecy, while recognizing the enormous challenges involved in actualizing their prophetic expectations within current political realities. International media coverage of Jerusalem consistently treats developments in the city as matters of global significance, creating worldwide awareness of religious and political tensions surrounding the Temple Mount. This international attention aligns with biblical prophecies about Jerusalem becoming a focal point for global conflict and divine intervention in human affairs. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has spent decades preparing for Third Temple construction, creating sacred vessels, training priests, and developing architectural plans based on biblical specifications. Their level of detailed preparation represents unprecedented practical steps toward temple restoration in modern times, creating tangible evidence that temple construction advocates are serious about their prophetic expectations. During my visits to the Temple Institute's facilities, I have been astounded by the craftsmanship and attention to biblical detail evident in their work. Golden menorahs crafted according to Exodus specifications, priestly garments sewn with biblical materials and techniques, and altar implements designed for actual temple service demonstrate serious commitment to authentic biblical worship rather than merely theoretical preparation. The Institute's educational programs and research initiatives have contributed significantly to scholarly understanding of biblical temple worship and ancient Jewish religious practices. Their work bridges archaeological research, biblical studies, and practical preparation for future temple service while creating comprehensive resources for understanding temple-related prophecy and its contemporary relevance. What particularly impresses me about the Temple Institute's approach is their integration of biblical specifications with modern construction techniques and safety requirements. Their architectural plans address practical concerns about utilities, accessibility, and structural engineering while maintaining strict adherence to biblical measurements and design principles described in Ezekiel and other prophetic texts. Hebrew Israelites view the Temple Institute's preparations with complex feelings, recognizing the prophetic significance of their work while maintaining their own understanding of their role in temple restoration. Some Hebrew Israelite scholars suggest that the Institute's preparations represent divine orchestration of conditions that will ultimately facilitate their own participation in temple service as restored tribal representatives rather than mere observers of other people's religious activities. The Institute's research into ancient temple procedures has revealed remarkable consistency between biblical descriptions and archaeological evidence, supporting arguments for the historical accuracy of scriptural accounts. This scholarly work provides valuable resources for Hebrew Israelites and other communities interested in understanding the practical aspects of biblical temple worship and its potential future restoration. The red heifer ritual described in Numbers chapter 19 has become central to discussions about Third Temple restoration because it provides the only biblically prescribed method for purifying the temple site and its vessels from ritual uncleanness. Recent claims about the discovery and breeding of qualified red heifers have intensified speculation about prophetic timelines and the practical prerequisites for temple operation. What absolutely fascinated me during my research into red heifer requirements is the extraordinary specificity of biblical qualifications and the remarkable rarity of animals meeting these standards. The heifer must be completely red without any other colored hairs, without physical blemish or defect, and must never have borne a yoke or performed any labor. These requirements are so precise that qualified animals appear perhaps once in a generation, making each potential discovery prophetically significant. Recent reports of red heifers being bred specifically for temple purification purposes have created excitement among various prophetic communities, including Hebrew Israelites who see these developments as signs of approaching restoration. The careful breeding programs, genetic selection techniques, and rabbinical supervision of these animals demonstrate serious preparation for temple service by people who believe in imminent prophetic fulfillment. The ritual process described in Numbers 19 involves burning the qualified red heifer completely with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet thread, then mixing the ashes with running water to create a purification solution for removing ritual uncleanness associated with death. Hebrew Israelites understand this ritual as essential preparation for their participation in temple service as restored tribal representatives, making red heifer discoveries personally significant for their prophetic expectations. What particularly intrigues me about red heifer prophecy is how it connects ancient ritual requirements with modern preparation for temple restoration. The convergence of biblical specifications, modern breeding techniques, religious oversight, and prophetic expectation creates conditions that many scholars consider unprecedented since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, suggesting that current developments may indeed represent approaching prophetic fulfillment. The theological significance of red heifer purification extends beyond practical preparation for temple service to symbolic representation of spiritual cleansing and restoration. Hebrew Israelites interpret red heifer prophecy as a sign of their approaching purification from the spiritual uncleanness associated with their dispersal and cultural oppression, preparing them for their role in restored temple worship. Biblical prophecies about end-times events consistently describe global conflicts and international alliances centered around Jerusalem and the land of Israel. Current geopolitical relationships and diplomatic developments increasingly align with these prophetic patterns, creating conditions that many biblical scholars consider historically unprecedented and potentially prophetically significant. Zechariah chapters 12 and 14 describe scenarios where all nations gather against Jerusalem, While Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 detail massive coalitions of nations attacking Israel during the latter days. When I analyze current international alliances, diplomatic relationships, and military partnerships, the alignment with these prophetic descriptions becomes remarkable and deeply concerning for anyone who takes biblical prophecy seriously. Hebrew Israelites interpret current global political developments as divine preparation for their recognition and restoration as legitimate heirs of biblical promises. They see growing international criticism of Israeli policies, increasing focus on Palestinian rights, and shifting diplomatic relationships as fulfillment of prophetic patterns that will ultimately lead to their acknowledgement as the true descendants of ancient Israel. Recent developments in Middle Eastern politics, including normalization agreements between Israel and various Arab nations, have created diplomatic conditions that many prophetic scholars consider significant for end times fulfillment. What particularly amazes me about these developments is how they simultaneously increase regional cooperation and create conditions for the larger conflicts described in biblical prophecy. The integration of economic relationships, military alliances, and religious factors in current international politics creates complex dynamics that align with biblical descriptions of end times coalitions and conflicts. Hebrew Israelites view these developments as signs that prophetic fulfillment is accelerating according to divine timetables, positioning them for recognition and restoration as central participants in God's plans for humanity's future. Current international responses to developments in Jerusalem consistently demonstrate the city's unique ability to generate global attention and complicate diplomatic relationships. This pattern aligns with biblical prophecies about Jerusalem becoming a source of international conflict and divine intervention, suggesting that current events may represent preliminary stages of end times fulfillment. Serious engagement with biblical prophecy and the contemporary relevance of ancient texts requires access to reliable scholarly resources, archaeological findings, and community support for ongoing learning and discussion. Modern technology provides unprecedented access to ancient manuscripts, archaeological databases, and scholarly research that can enhance understanding of prophetic texts and their potential fulfillment. Bible study applications in online databases offer convenient access to Hebrew and Greek texts, archaeological discoveries, and scholarly commentaries that can deepen understanding of prophetic passages. What particularly excites me about these digital resources is how they democratize access to scholarly tools that were previously available only to academic researchers and seminary students. Hebrew Israelite communities across America welcome sincere individuals who want to learn about their theology and cultural practices through respectful dialogue and genuine intellectual curiosity. These interactions provide opportunities for first-hand exposure to Hebrew Israelite perspectives on biblical prophecy, and contemporary relevance while building personal relationships that transcend cultural and religious boundaries. Local Hebrew Israelite congregations often host educational programs, cultural celebration, and community events that are open to visitors interested in learning about their beliefs and practices. What has impressed me about these gatherings is their emphasis on biblical literacy and historical research rather than emotional manipulation or pressure tactics for conversion or commitment. Visiting archaeological sites in Israel and surrounding regions provides tangible connections with biblical history that can enhance understanding of prophetic texts through geographical and historical context. These experiences can deepen appreciation for the complexity of ancient civilizations while demonstrating the ongoing relevance of archaeological research for contemporary religious and historical questions. Documentary films, lectures, and educational programs about biblical archaeology and prophecy provide accessible introductions to complex topics while maintaining intellectual integrity and respect for different perspectives. These resources can help beginners develop foundational knowledge while encouraging deeper research into specific areas of personal interest related to the Al-Aqsa versus Third Temple controversy. We have journeyed together through this explosive revelation that reveals the tension building over the world's most contested sacred site. The collision between Al-Aqsa Mosque and Third Temple prophecy represents far more than a local religious dispute. It embodies the convergence of ancient prophecies, modern politics, and eternal destinies that will reshape human history. In my 4 decades of studying these materials, I have never encountered such compelling evidence for imminent prophetic fulfillment. The convergence of archaeological discoveries, geopolitical developments, And religious preparations creates conditions that demand serious attention from anyone who believes in biblical prophecy and divine intervention in human affairs. The Hebrew Israelite perspective on these developments offers crucial insights that mainstream religious and academic communities have too long ignored or dismissed. Their understanding of their identity as descendants of ancient Israel and their role in prophetic fulfillment provides essential context for interpreting current events and preparing for future developments that may transform religious and political landscapes worldwide. The question each of us must answer is whether we will embrace the responsibility that comes with this knowledge or allow conventional thinking and cultural prejudices to prevent us from recognizing prophetic fulfillment when it unfolds before our eyes. The tension between Al-Aqsa and the Third Temple may represent the final test of our willingness to acknowledge divine sovereignty over human affairs and biblical truth over political convenience. I urge you to continue this journey of discovery by pursuing the research resources, community connections, and scholarly engagement we have discussed. Share your insights with others, participate in respectful dialogue across cultural boundaries, and maintain openness to evidence that might challenge your current understanding of biblical prophecy and contemporary relevance. The final battle for the Temple Mount may be closer than we imagine, and our response to these developing events will determine whether we participate in prophetic fulfillment or remain passive observers of history's most significant transformation. The choice is yours, but the time for decision is rapidly approaching.